Once upon a time, near a deep, dark forest, there lived a poor woodcutter with his wife and 2 children. The boy was named Hansel, and the girl was named Gretel. The family never had very much to eat, and now, when times were hard, people around the land were starving, and the poor woodcutter could not get enough food to feed his family. As he lay in bed one night, tossing and turning with worry, he turned to his wife and said, "What is going to happen to us? How can we feed our poor children when we haven't got enough for ourselves?" "Listen to me," said his wife. "Early tomorrow morning," the cold-hearted woman said, "we'll take the children deep into the woods. We'll give each of them a piece of bread and make a fire. Then we'll leave them and go about our work. They won't find the way home in time for dinner, and we will eat their share." "No," said the man, "I cannot do that. I cannot leave my children alone in the woods, where there will be wild animals. It will get dark and cold as the sun sets." "Then you are a fool," snapped the woman. "You might as well accept it that we will starve." Then she nagged the poor man and scolded him and kept at him until at last he agreed. "But I feel sorry for my poor children," he said quietly. The 2 children were so hungry that they had not been able to sleep, and so they heard everything their stepmother said to their father. Gretel cried, but Hansel whispered, "Don't worry, I will think of something." And when their parents had gone to sleep, Hansel got up, put on his little coat, and sneaked outside. The moon was shining brightly, and the white pebbles that lay in front of the house glittered like silver coins. Hansel stooped and filled the pocket of his coat with as many pebbles as it would hold. Then he tiptoed back to bed and said, "Gretel, go to sleep, my little sister." At daybreak, the woman came and woke the 2 children. "Get up, you lazy bones! We're going to the forest to get some wood." She gave them each a piece of bread and said, "That's your food for the day. Don't eat it all at once, because it is all you are going to get. We will have supper after we return from the woods. That is, if you are home in time." Gretel carried both pieces of bread in her apron, for Hansel's pockets were full of pebbles. They all started out on their way to the forest. As they walked, Hansel kept turning and looking back at the house again and again. His father said, "Hansel, what are you looking at? You must watch where you're going." "Oh," said Hansel, "I'm just looking at my little white kitten sitting on the roof of the house to say goodbye." The wife said, "You little fool, that's not your kitten. That's just the sun shining on the chimney. Now come along." But Hansel stayed a few steps behind and kept turning. Each time he turned, he dropped a pebble from his pocket to mark the way. When they were deep in the forest, the father said, "Gather some firewood, children. I'll start a fire so you won't get cold while we work." Hansel and Gretel gathered a little mountain of twigs and sticks, and when the fire was burning, the wife said, "Stay by the fire, you 2. We have to go and cut wood. When we're finished, we'll come back and get you." So Hansel and Gretel sat by the fire. After a time, they ate their bread. And after a longer time, they got so tired that they closed their eyes and fell asleep. When they woke, it was dark, and they were all alone. Gretel began to cry, but Hansel comforted her. "Wait a little until the moon rises," he said. When the full moon had risen, Hansel took his little sister by the hand and followed the pebbles, which glittered like silver coins, and showed them the way. They walked on through the night, and at last, at the break of day, they came to their father's house. They knocked on the door, and when the woman opened it, she was shocked. But all she said was, "Why, there you are! Why did you stay so long in the forest? We thought you were never coming home again." Of course, their father was glad to see them, for it had broken his heart to leave them alone. Not very long afterward, times were hard again, and there was very little food to eat. Again, the children heard their stepmother say to their father one night, "There's nothing left but half a loaf of bread. After that, we're done. We don't have any food for ourselves and the children. This time, we'll take them so deep in the forest that they won't find their way back for a week." "But, wife," said the man, with a heavy heart, "it would be better to share our last bite of food with the children." But the wife would not listen to him, and she knew if she kept at him, she could get him to give in and agree with her plan as he did before. Much later, when their parents were asleep, Hansel got up to collect pebbles, just as he did before. But he couldn't get out. His stepmother had figured out how they had found their way home last time, and she locked the door. So Hansel got back in bed and tried to think of a different plan. Early the next morning, the woman roused the children out of bed. She gave them a piece of bread even smaller than before. As they walked into the woods, Hansel broke up the bread in his pocket, and every once in a while he stopped to throw a crumb on the ground. "Hansel," said his father, "what do you keep stopping and looking back for?" "I'm looking at a little pigeon that's sitting on the roof, and he wants to say goodbye to me," answered Hansel. "Little fool," said the wife, "that's not a pigeon. It's only the sun shining on the chimney." So they walked on, and Hansel dropped breadcrumbs along the way. The woman led the children deeper into the forest than they had ever been in all their lives. Again, they gathered sticks for a fire, and the woman said, "Sit there, children, and when you are tired, go to sleep. We're going to cut wood, and when we're finished, we'll come back to get you." Later, when it was lunchtime, Gretel shared her small piece of bread with Hansel, because he had left his crumbs along the path. Then they fell asleep. As evening came, no one came to get them. When they woke, it was dark, and they were alone. When the moon rose, they started for home, but they could not find the breadcrumbs. The birds had eaten them up. "Come, Gretel," said Hansel, "I know we can find our way." But they couldn't find it. They went on all night and the next day, from morning until evening, but they could not find their way out of the forest. They were terribly hungry, for they had nothing to eat but a few berries. When they were so tired that they could not drag themselves any farther, they lay down under a tree and fell asleep. It was now the third morning since they had left their father's house. They started along again, always looking for the way home, but instead only going deeper and deeper into the forest. Unless help came soon, they would surely starve. At about noon, they saw a pretty snow-white bird sitting on a branch and singing beautifully that they stopped to listen. Then the bird spread its wings and flew before them as though to say, "Follow me." And so the children followed the bird until they came to a little house, and the bird flew up and perched on the roof. And then the children saw that the walls of the house were made of gingerbread, and the roof was made of cake, and the windows were made of a clear sugar candy. "Let's eat," cried Hansel. Hansel reached up and broke off a piece of candy, while Gretel chewed on a piece of wall. Suddenly, they heard a thin, screechy woman's voice call out from inside the house, "Nibble, nibble, like a mouse. Who is nibbling at my house?" The children answered, "It's only the air heaving a sigh. It's only the wind passing by." The children were so hungry they went on eating. But then the door opened, and a very old woman came out, leaning on a cane. Hansel and Gretel were so frightened that they dropped the food from their hands. But the old woman just nodded her head and said, "My dear little children, what has brought you here? Come inside and stay with me. I'll take good care of you." So she took them by the hand and led them into her house. There they found a wonderful meal of hot pancakes with honey, nuts, apples, and cold milk. After that, the old woman showed them 2 little white beds, and Hansel and Gretel lay down and wondered if they were just dreaming. Now the old woman seemed kind, but in fact she was a wicked witch. The story goes that she built her house just to trap little children, and once she had them, she would cook them in the oven and eat them. She could not see well, but she had an excellent sense of smell. Earlier in the day, she had sniffed Hansel and Gretel coming near. The next morning, before the children were awake, the witch got up and looked at their rosy cheeks. What a fine meal I will have," she cackled. She got Hansel out of bed and put him in a cage. Then she went back and woke up Gretel and shouted, "Get up, you lazy bones! Fetch water and cook something nice for your brother. Feed him well, for once he's nice and fat, I will eat him." Gretel screamed and cried, but it was no use. She had to do what the wicked witch said. Day after day she cooked pots full of food, rich food for Hansel, while she herself ate nothing but crumbs. Every morning the wicked witch would creep to the cage and say, "Hansel, stick out your finger so I can tell if you are plump enough to cook." But clever Hansel held out a little bone that Gretel had given him, and the old woman, who could not see very well, couldn't tell that it wasn't Hansel's finger. She wondered why he wasn't getting any plumper. When 4 weeks passed by and Hansel seemed as thin as ever, the witch grew impatient. "Hurry up and get a pot of water," she snarled. "Be fat or thin, I'm going to cook him and eat him." As she filled the kettle with water and lit the fire, tears ran down Gretel's cheeks. "First we will bake," said the old woman. "I've heated the oven and the dough is ready." Then she pushed Gretel towards the oven, where the flames were burning brightly. "Stick your head in," the witch said to Gretel, "and tell me if it's hot enough for us to bake the bread." But Gretel knew what the witch had in mind. She knew that if the witch meant to shut her in the oven, bake her and eat her. So Gretel said, "I don't know how to do it. Where do I look? Could you show me how?" "Oh, you silly child," cried the old woman. "There's a big opening, don't you see? Why, I could fit in myself." And so she stuck her head in the oven. Then Gretel rushed up, and with all her might she pushed the witch in the oven, shut the iron door, and locked it tight. Gretel ran right to Hansel and let him out of the cage. "Come, Hansel, we are free," she cried. "The old witch is gone." Hansel sprang out and hugged Gretel, and the children danced for joy, and then ran out of the house. Then, because they had nothing to fear, they went back into the witch's house. There they found chests full of pearls and precious jewels. "These are better than pebbles," laughed Hansel as he filled his pockets, while Gretel filled her apron. "Now away we go," said Hansel. Then he said quietly, "If only we can find our way out of the forest." When they had walked a few hours and come to a wide lake, "There's no bridge and no stepping stones," said Hansel. "We can't get across. And there's no boat either," said Gretel. "But look," she said, "here comes a duck. I will ask the duck for help." So she called out, "Duck, duck, here we stand, Hansel and Gretel on the land. Stepping stones and a bridge we lack. Carry us over, or on nice soft back." And lo and behold, the duck came over. Hansel got on her back and told Gretel to sit behind him. When they were on the other side of the lake, they walked on for a little while and soon found a path. The forest began to look more and more familiar. At last, in the distance, they saw their father's house. They began to run as fast as they could. They burst through the door and cried out, "Father, we're home!" Then they threw themselves into his arms. Ever since he had left the children in the forest, the man had been worried sick. As for his mean wife, he told the children she was gone. Now he hugged his children as though he would never let them go. As he squeezed Gretel close to him, the pearls and jewels fell from Gretel's apron. Then Hansel reached into his pockets and pulled out handful after handful of treasure. They were together again, their troubles were over, and they lived in perfect happiness for a long, long time. The end.